The topics that have come to my mind in terms of what I should be addressing have also evolved. And let me be the first to say that some of the things that I'm talking to you about, I myself am struggling with. And that is the norm and not the exception. So don't feel guilty and don't feel like this is just something that speaks to you or that this is a reality that only a few are facing. When there is deep uncertainty and deep tension, then that has the ability to really cause us to always be on the edge. And that's the case when it comes to faith, right? And if you think about the way Allah describes how we're on the edge when it comes to faith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ عَلَى حَرْفٍ. There are some people that worship Allah on an edge, literally standing on the edge of a cliff, okay? And what that speaks to is that when hardship comes to them in regards to their relationship with Allah, so if something bad happens to them, then they're on the edge in regards to their faith, i.e. their relationship with Allah. Naturally, when it comes to our relationships with everybody around us, even if we're not physically in the same space, but especially when we're physically in the same space, we're even more on an edge when we're facing a hardship and when we constantly feel like our core is disrupted. And so I want to talk about sabr in a different way. And inshallah ta'ala, I do hope that this khutbah will be beneficial. But I really want to break down sabr and connect it to what we're going through right now. And inshallah, in a very practical way that can speak to all of our realities, no matter where on the spectrum we are right now, in terms of how easily we get irritated, or if we're having a hard time, balancing your minor irritations with your major frustrations, right? So you have these major uncertainties about what's going to happen regarding your health, regarding finances, whatever it is, regarding the future. And then you also have just the things that are happening on a daily basis and things that can really annoy you suddenly that did not necessarily annoy you in the past. And this is not just in the capacity of marriage, by the way. Again, when you're on the edge, you're on the edge, and things can really get to you quite suddenly. So let's go through a few of these things. Number one, a rule that Imam al-Ghazali, may Allah have mercy on him, he said that patience with people is more difficult than patience with hardship. And what he meant by that is, when something happens to you, but it's an unassigned disaster, I mean, you can't blame that disaster on another person. It's different than when someone is causing you harm, okay? When you can assign your hardship to a person, okay? So there's a difference between death by natural causes and death by murder, right? And that's natural, right? It is a natural sentiment that when it's death by murder, the feeling of injustice and the recourse that is due afterwards, the penalty and the recourse and all that is there for a reason, right? Now, Allah has written death on a person at that time regardless, but when it's a person that I can point to that caused me that harm, that murdered my loved one, then it's different than when someone passed away in a car accident or due to a sudden heart attack or whatever it may be, even though that's painful. The loss of a loved one is painful regardless. And so these two categories of patients are pretty self-explanatory in terms of the degree that they occupy, right? So patients with hardship that's unassigned disaster, and patients with hardship that's assigned directly to a person, which can cause added layers of trauma, added layers of damage to a person. But there's a third category that I think applies to us right now, okay? And obviously that doesn't mean that the other two don't apply to each of us in different capacities. But there's a third category that I think applies to most of us right now, which is patience with people in the midst of an unassigned disaster. Okay? Patience with people in the midst of an unassigned disaster. So the first category of patience is someone harmed you and your patience directly involves another person. Okay? The second category of patience is disaster strikes and I have to be patient with that disaster, and that's going to affect my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third category is patience with people in the midst of that unassigned disaster. And so I'm going through something right now. I am, hurt by whatever's happening around me in a way that I really can't understand, because this is an unprecedented trial. And so I'm trying to wrap my head around how this is affecting me in different ways. And there are people around me, okay? Or there are people that are going to bear the brunt of my frustration or my grief in the midst of all of that. And it's not their fault, which makes it so much worse, right? Because you're hurting, and then when you're hurt, you're hurting others. So hurting people hurt other people. And when you have a situation where people are quarantined together and they're hurting in different ways, then that hurt can be that much more. Okay? So I want us to take a step back, inshallah, and to really look at prophetic guidance, at the way that the Prophet ﷺ taught us to deal with these things and how they would specifically apply to our situations right now. And so first you kind of go through the basics, right? The basics. And this is especially true when it comes to the annoyances. Most of the ahadith where the Prophet ﷺ talked about how to treat anger, how to treat, a person's impatience or annoyance, speak to things that are of a lesser degree of severity. Okay? So for example, the Prophet ﷺ did not tell a person who just lost a child to go make wudu. The Prophet ﷺ did not tell someone whose family member was just murdered, go make wudu, right? To go in and do ablution, to perform, to wash your face, to do what's necessary to cool yourself down, right? Saying isti'adah, seeking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the shaitan. The Prophet ﷺ was not saying that to people, and though it's always necessary, wudu is always necessary, isti'adah is always necessary, but the Prophet ﷺ was not saying that when it comes to, these major difficulties in life. It's really those annoyances that have the potential to spiral into something much worse. Okay, so to stop it before it spirals into something much worse. And he always connected it to the shaitan. He always connected it to the devil. And subhanAllah, some of you might have seen that image that's been going around that said this is the first year that we're locked away before the shayateen in Ramadan. SubhanAllah, I mean, usually Ramadan comes around, we talk about the shayateen being locked up, the shayateen being locked up, the shayateen being locked up, right? So now we're locked up and the shayateen are locked up with us, all right? So they're still here and we're tight, in our places. And so the shaitan has a lot to work with right now. And the way the shaitan deals with sin in general is the shaitan always tries to do two things with sin. All right. And I want you to deeply connect this to your relationship with other people, because this is in regards to your relationship with Allah. The shaitan tries to take a one-time sin and turn it into a sinful habit. That's number one. Number two, the shaitan tries to take a minor sin and turn it into a major sin. Number three, the shaitan tries to take major sin and turn it into disbelief and despair. All right. So the first one is take a sin that a person commits for the first time. Allah put barriers between you and that sin. And you commit that sin, and now that you've committed that sin, shaitan says, how about you just go ahead and keep committing it now? The second one is that it's a smaller sin, and usually a smaller sin is a portion of a major sin. So for example, there's the zina of the eyes, the adultery of the eyes, but it's not like the adultery, right? Like the major sin of adultery, okay? There is ghiba. Some of the scholars of Tazkiyah of Suluk, and I can't remember which scholar said this, but I did find it very insightful. He said that a person starts with ghiba, but he ends up in namima. Ghiba is backbiting, gossip, and it's dhikruka akhak bima yakrah, to say something that's true about other people. But ghiba, is the gateway to namima, slander, right? So what comes after gossip is just naturally going to be slander. Okay, so the point is that he'll take a minor sin and turn it into a major sin. And then the third thing is he'll take a major sin and turn it into disbelief and despair, which means a point of no return. Now think about this in regards to our relationships with each other, okay? The way that we deal with one another, all right? Especially those that are closest to us and those that are quarantined with us and those that are around in whatever capacity, all right? How do you take a one time and turn it into a habit? Okay, so one infraction in the relationship, and how do you spur that into a habitual point of dispute, a habitual point of argumentation, and keep people at each other's throats so that they have no peace? The second one is a minor sin to a major sin, right? So a person starts, there's so many different ways of this, right? You start to become emotionally abusive, mentally abusive, emotionally abusive, verbally abusive. It just goes and it keeps going and going until it becomes physically abusive, and it's just horrific. It becomes a horrific cycle. And then the third thing is a point of no return, right? So major sin to kufr in the relationship with Allah is, how do I take this to a point of no return? Okay? To make them feel like there is no way that they can come back to Allah. Likewise, in our relationships, shaitan will be the first one to suggest, that just break it all off, right? Turn your back on that person, forget about it, cut it all off, cut it loose. Okay? That's not talking about the very real necessary times in which some relationships do need to be severed, by the way. I'm not talking about toxicity or tolerating abuse, okay? So please don't understand anything from this khutbah to be saying that a person should remain in an abusive situation. I'm talking about taking minor infractions and leading them into major disputes and sins that are long-term and that put you on a place of no return. That's what the shaitan does with your relationship with Allah. And that's the same playbook he's going to use in your relationship with one another. And as I was looking through all of these ahadith of how the Prophet ﷺ taught us to deal with our minor frustrations, our constant annoyances, our irritations. And he always mentions the shaitan, always mentions the devil. Okay? Not as and it's important because it's not blaming the shaitan to excuse bad behavior. It's to empower good behavior with the understanding that shaitan will exploit your heedlessness. All right. So there's a difference between those two things. It's not, I'm sorry, the shaitan made me do this. The shaitan made me say this. The shaitan. No. It's know that you have devils that will exploit and that will take advantage of the openings that you give them into your heart, into your relationship with Allah, and into your relationship with one another. Don't give them that space. So here is an empowering way for you to push the shaitan out, right? So it's a very different mindset and approach. So let's look through these ahadith, and you've heard them, but I want you to pay attention to the things that are common between all three of these things. The hadith in al-Bukhari, that the Prophet ﷺ saw two men that were abusing one another verbally. So they were getting heated, and as they started to get heated with their words, with their exchange, then they started to get in each other's faces. Their faces turned red. It was about to turn into something much worse. The Prophet ﷺ is looking at these two men fighting, and he's speaking to those that are sitting with him, and he says, إِنِّي لَأَعْلَمُ كَلِمَةً لَوْ قَالَهَا لَذَهَبَ عَنْهُ الَّذِي يَجِدُ. I know a word that if he were to say it, then that anger that he's facing would go away. That anger that he's encountering, that's boiling inside of him right now, would go away. Notice the Prophet ﷺ did not go tell the man. Why? Because when he's already in his fit and he doesn't understand the mechanisms by which to deal with that fit, then he's not going to process anything rationally at that moment. Shaitan's already in the driver's seat. So this is a case of, let's just stop. Let a person blow off their steam, cool it off, and then let's talk when things are cooled off, because you're not going to understand anything I have to say right now. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ did not go up to him and say, hey, say A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim. Say I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed devil. Because if the Prophet ﷺ said that to him in the midst of that, he might have responded in a way that he would eternally regret to the Prophet ﷺ. So in the wisdom of the Prophet ﷺ, he's using this as a teaching moment for everybody else, because that man just has to blow off his steam. You need to put them apart from each other. Nothing's going to change right now about his habits. Okay? Just pull them apart from each other, sit them down, calm them down, but he's not going to process the statement of the Prophet ﷺ right now. The proof of which is that one of the men that was sitting with the Prophet ﷺ, when he said, I know something that if he were to say it, then he would, then he would be able to do away with that anger. One of the men that was sitting with the Prophet ﷺ said, well, let me go tell him, right? So he went to the man and he told him. So the man responded, he turned his anger towards him. He says, Atura bi ba'sun? Amajnunun ana adhab? Ana adhab? Am I crazy? Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think I'm insane? Do you want me to go? You go away, So he flipped out on the guy instead, right? So he, instead of the object of his anger being the person he was already fighting, now he was fighting with the other person, all right? And the Prophet ﷺ understood that wisdom. So you're not going to turn someone's habits or give them the right processing mechanisms in the midst of their anger. But again, the Prophet ﷺ said, Ista'idh billah, seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the shaitan, from the accursed devil. And, some of the scholars, they say that in some of the narrations, the Messenger ﷺ said, say, A'udhu billahi as-sami' al-alim minash shaitan ar-rajim. I seek refuge in Allah from the all-hearing and the all-knowing from the accursed devil. And they said that is a better form of isti'adha, a better form of seeking refuge in the midst of anger. Why? Because you remind yourself that Allah hears and Allah knows. Okay? So you're still achieving removing the shaitan, but you're also bringing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reminding yourself of two core attributes in the midst of that debate or that discussion or that anger that you have. And again, this isn't a huge annoyance. This is just in the midst of a heated argument, and things get heated really, really, really quickly. So say, A'udhu billahi as-sami' al-'alim minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge in God, the all-hearing and the all-knowing, from the accursed devil. Bring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala into you, into that scenario like that. The second thing is wudu. The Prophet ﷺ said to do wudu. Every single time I've gone to any of those websites about anger management tips, you'll always see something about washing the face, cooling off, right? Go wash your face, take a break. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said for people to take a break and to actually do wudu. So what's the connection between those two things? Well, number one, the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-ajalatu min ash-shaytan. Haste is from the devil. Haste is from the devil. Shaitan is going to try to make you say as many damaging things as possible before you come to your senses. So he's going to hurry you up. Speak, do. He wants you to act in the point of action. He wants you to act in the midst of your anger. And so he wants you to hurry up and say as much as you want. So don't say these two words. You know what? You're already throwing some hurtful comments. Go ahead and add a third one. You know what would be a knockout punch right now? Right? Throw that one in there too. Bring this into the discussion. Bring this into play. So Shaitan's going to try to get you to pile on as much as possible in that short period of time so that you can say as many things that contribute to his ultimate goal of no return. And what did Allah mention? الَّذِي يُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَزَوْجِهِ, that the devil loves to pull apart a couple. And it's not just the husband from the wife or the wife from the husband. It's children, it's parents, it's all of those things. Shaitan wants to make these points of no return, right? So what did the Prophet ﷺ say? Don't act in haste. So he said, if you're standing up, sit down. If you're sitting down, lay down. But just don't act. Be quiet. Don't say anything. If you're that upset, take a break. Take a break. And everyone in the household should afford each other that opportunity to take a break. You're really upset right now? You know what? Go ahead and just, sit with yourself. It's okay. I understand. You don't want to talk right now. That's good. Just take a break. It's better to not say anything than to say something hurtful. However, prolonged periods of silence, and this is sort of the disclaimer, prolonged periods of silence can actually be weaponized in a more harmful way than conversation. That's why the Prophet ﷺ gave had limitations to those periods of silence. The period of silence should not be a hurtful weapon in and of itself. The period of silence should be enough to allow the shaitan to be removed from that point of anger so that you're not acting in that point of anger or saying anything in that point of anger. So it's not like I'm not going to talk to you. It's let me take some time. Let me just take a few moments. Let me take a few minutes. Let me take a break. Let me pull off to the side, right? So the Prophet ﷺ also connected that to the shaitan. So he connected isti'adha, seeking refuge in Allah from the shaitan. He connected haste to the shaitan. Don't act in the midst of an argument or in the midst of that anger. And then he even connected, while you're at it, do wudu too. Go wash up, okay? And particularly, don't just go wash your face because it cools you down, as an act of worship. And here's there's a beautiful narration. So there are numerous ahadith that are sahih, that are authentic when talking about making wudu in a place of anger. This hadith, which has a slight weakness in Abu Dawood, but it's not a major weakness, but it's very profound. It adds another element to this, that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna al-ghadab min ash-shaytan, wa inna ash-shaytan khuliqa min an-nar, wa innama tudfa'u an-nar bil-ma'. فَإِذَا غَضِبَ أَحَدُكُمْ فَلْيَتَوَضَّأ." The Prophet ﷺ said that anger is from the devil. Anger is from the shaitan. And the devil was created from fire. And fire is put out with water. So when one of you becomes angry, then go ahead and do wudu. Okay, go ahead and do wudu. All right, so perform the wudu so that you can do what you have to do, inshallah ta'ala, in order to remove the shaitan with that washing and with that act of worship. So there are three things now that the Prophet ﷺ gave, and they're all connected to expelling the shaitan from our homes, expelling the shaitan from our interactions. Now, I want to bring this together in a more particular way that speaks to our current reality. Right now, it's more important than ever to take breaks when we need to take breaks and to create space in the homes for people to be able to take those breaks. Okay? So, just because we're all physically, quarantined or put into the same spaces does not mean that we can't create that room and that space for each other sometimes. So that's the first thing. Number two, talking through our feelings outside of the point of anger allows you to be silent when you're angry. Let me be very clear with this. I talked about weaponizing silence. All right. So using silence to actually hurt someone. All right. When you actually talk about your feelings when you're not angry, it allows for the other person to have a better understanding of why you don't want to talk right now. Okay. So talk about our vulnerabilities, talk about the way that we're feeling, talk about why we feel this way. After the anger dissipates, what do you think it was that triggered that made you think that way, that put you in that situation? So talk through your feelings. Number three, worshiping together. Worshiping together. Why? Because you're not just trying to expel your individual shayateen, you're trying to expel the shayateen of the home. And what expels the shayateen of the home is worship. And what expels the shayateen from your relationship is worshiping together. And what expels your individual shayateen is individual worship. So worship, ibadah, is a way of removing the shaitan. So praying together when you can, discussing things together, having conversations that are religious. And when people are having religious conversations, that opens the door to have some more vulnerable conversations that are absolutely necessary right now. And the last thing, which is super important right now, okay? One thing I learned from the Prophet ﷺ, or I should say we learned from the Prophet ﷺ when we look at his life and the arguments that happened in his home, is the Prophet ﷺ never dismissed someone else's pain because his pain was bigger. He never dismissed someone else's pain because his pain was bigger. What does that mean? Like, if you think about some of the arguments that he had in his home, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that upset Aisha radiallahu anha or Safiya radiallahu anha, there's something that really is very apparent. He never, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said that, I've got bigger things to worry about. Like, you're bringing this up right now, this minor thing up, and I'm sitting here worrying about, not getting my ummah killed. So if someone's going to talk about important duties, no one was more important to the people than the Prophet ﷺ. No one was more important to the world than the Prophet ﷺ, right? So it's not like I've got more important things to do. I don't have time for your silliness. I don't have time for your argument. I don't have time for what bothers you because I'm going through something much worse. Why is this so important right now in particular? Okay? It's so important right now in particular because though all of us are struggling in unique ways and in different ways, some of us certainly struggling more than others, everyone is struggling in some way right now. Okay? And that could be an emotional struggle, a mental struggle. Even if you got kids in the house, they're struggling with, social pain. They're struggling with the uncertainty of not knowing when school's going to be back on, whatever it is, not seeing their friends. Everyone is struggling in some way right now in the house, right? So you might, if you're the breadwinner in the house, right, then you're thinking about how am I going to keep, paying the bills? And that's certainly a great struggle and can cause anxiety and stress in many different ways. If your parents are sick, right, and your spouse's parents are not sick, that can cause great stress. That's a unique stress. If you have an added duty that you did not have in the past, that can cause stress. If you're having problems getting structured, if you still have a job and you can't work properly, all of those things cause stress. All of these things are causing us issues in different ways. Do not belittle the other person's stress in the house because you think, and you might be right, by the way, that your stress is bigger. Because there's no doubt that the Prophet ﷺ stress was bigger than everybody else in his home, right? We love our mother Aisha radiallahu anha, and this is not dismissing Aisha radiallahu anha or no, Aisha radiallahu anha was a woman of worship, a woman of righteousness. Okay, Aisha radiallahu anha did not have the responsibilities of the Prophet ﷺ, but still the Prophet ﷺ honored what disturbed Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha by settling those things. right? So it wasn't just, you talk about the sweetness of the Prophet ﷺ, to pay attention to the minor details of drinking from the same part of the cup as her, doing the small romantic things. That attention to detail carried into times of adversity too. That if Aisha radiallahu anha was disturbed by something, it wasn't the Prophet ﷺ never, ever, ever says, I've got more to worry about than you, or my anger or my stress is greater than your stress. How many of those arguments or disputes or those things that come up in the traditions which are narrated by Aisha radiallahu anha to teach us about the amazingness of our Prophet ﷺ and to teach us a standard that we can all aspire to? How many of them came in the midst of battle? How many of them came in the midst of persecution? The Prophet ﷺ's 23 years of prophethood, each year has a significant amount of adversity in it, right? But still, you never once hear the Prophet ﷺ say, I don't have time for this right now, or I am going through this, and I need to worry about this right now. Why? Please listen very carefully. Because even if your pain is bigger than the other person's pain in the house, prioritizing your pain over that person's pain means you're really just prioritizing yourself over the other people in your home. All right? So prioritizing yourself is by prioritizing your pain and making it seem like it's the only stress and anxiety that exists in the house. So don't belittle the other person's stress. Don't belittle the other person's pain. Don't belittle what everyone else is going through in the house, including the kids, by the way. If you got children in the home, everyone's going through something, right? Try to listen and hear what they're going through. Don't ever say, I'm going through more than what you're going through, or I've got more to worry about, because those are signs of narcissism. And narcissism is very satanic. Shaitan is the ultimate narcissist, right? So he's going to feed a narcissistic presence in the home as well. Do not say, my pain is greater than yours. I'm going through something that you're not going through. I've got to worry about this. You've got to worry about this silly thing. Don't do that. It's not fair. It's not prophetic. It's not the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So yes, we're all struggling in very unique ways right now. Ways that maybe we can't understand how the other person's struggling. We don't even understand how we're struggling right now, right? Each one of us is having to dig deeply and think, how am I struggling right now? How is this affecting me? How is this rupturing my way of thinking right now, right? Why am I so upset about this all of a sudden? So we're trying to figure ourselves out. So we're definitely not going to figure everyone else out right now. Okay. So in the meantime, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calm all of us, and those that indeed have been suffering far more than all of us, our brothers and sisters that were already suffering around the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate their pain. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remove their oppression. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replace the shayateen in our homes with malaika, with angels. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replace our hardships with ease, replace our points of dispute to points of connection. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us sakina and tranquility. And particularly, by the way, and tonight, inshallah ta'ala, my reflection is going to be a message specifically to those that are alone. You're hearing all of these messages about family and family tension and what's happening in the house. May Allah surround you with angels. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala build in you a resilience that will allow you to keep going and to power through this, not needing anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For surely we will only be resurrected alone in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah comfort you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be with you. May Allah allow all of us that are not having to go through this alone to do a better job of reaching you and providing you the comfort that's needed right now. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help everyone that is going through this in their own unique ways.